Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Dr. Joseph E. Marshall Jr., who is the executive director and co-founder of Alive and Free. And if you haven't heard of them before, they're an organization that wants to end violence and change lives. And if you're new here to this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to talk about how you and everyone else can stay alive and free. And we're going to explore what are the commandments that leads to violence and what rules can you live after to make sure you stay alive and free. Dr. Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today.
Thank you for having me, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we jump in, could you give us a background on your organization? What is it that you do and how do you work?
Alive and Free is a violence prevention and education organization. It began, I guess my co-founder and I started this thing almost 34 years ago.
Wow.
It evolved out of our work with young people. Both of us were educators here in the United States. And so many of our young people that we knew were bright and promising ended up in jail or dead from getting into violent activities, gangs, drugs, you name it. So, obviously it hurt us a lot. So we wanted to do something about trying to prevent our young people from falling into death and incarceration. So we started this thing. It wasn't originally named Alive and Free. It was actually called the Omega Boys Club. And we quickly, girls came, so we had both boys and girls. But our mission, we knew our mission was to keep them alive, unharmed by violence, and free from incarceration. So we would always, instead of saying stop something, we would tell them we wanted to aspire to something. So their aspiration became to stay alive and to stay free. And eventually that became our mantra. And so we actually then changed the organization's formal name to Alive and Free. So Alive and Free is an organization that strives to do that, to keep young people alive, unharmed by violence, and free from incarceration. We also provide them with opportunity, to move on to positive lives and do positive things in their lives and in their communities. And my reward for these young people in sort of staying alive and free, being part of the solution, not part of the problem, was actually, like I say, I opened my big mouth and said, well, if you want to go to college, I'll help you do that. And I'll even help you find money for it. So that was my reward, personal reward for them doing staying alive and free. And so we began to send the young people to college to find money for them. We now have 250 college graduates. Wow. They pick the, we find the money. But that's sort of that attracts everybody's attention, because you're taking these young people, send them to college, and their lives are completely changed. I could go into a list of alumni, but the bigger picture with them, I couldn't, send them to college or help them get jobs or anything if I couldn't keep them alive and free. So the bigger picture here is being able to stop the violence. That's really what I'm trying to get these young people to do, so that they can become all that they can be. We began to develop a prescription for that. It took a while to develop exactly how we were doing that. So we came up with what we call the alive and free prescription in order to save these young people. And this prescription has certain elements. Uh, it has what we call risk factors for violence. It's almost medical in its approach. It has
Yeah.
the thinking behind violence. It has rules you should live by to prevent the onset of violence. And a main component is dealing with any emotional residue inside because you got into violence in the first place. I pretty much tested this prescription out everywhere. One of the wonderful things about doing this work so long is I've been around the world. I've been to Thailand and to several countries in Africa. I've been to, Montreal. I've been to Toronto. I've been to places, and I've sort of looked at violence from a historical perspective and a world perspective to see if, in fact, this prescription applied to people everywhere. And my joy is that it actually does. So while my clinic, so to speak, is these young people, or my laboratory is a clinic is these young people that I work here in the neighborhoods in America, I know that what I'm talking about is something that will work anywhere. And a few years ago, I began to teach this prescription to people who found me. A gentleman from South Africa found me and traveled here, and I taught him the prescriptions, and he's working with young people in Cape Town, South Africa right now to keep them alive and free. A young woman in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, heard about me, brought her young people down to headquarters, the Alive and Free headquarters, and I taught her the prescription, and she's doing work in Canada. So people have begun to realize that the message in this case is bigger than the messenger. The prescription is what makes this thing work. It's not so much. Obviously, I love young people. I want the best for them. I don't want their lives ending up in violence. I don't want them perpetrating violence on others. But if I was the only doctor in the world that knew this, then it's like anything else. You got to have doctors who know about what I call the disease of violence. So the bigger picture here is anybody in the world, if they use this prescription, I believe, can literally stop the violence. And that's pretty revolutionary for people to hear, because they think that their situation is different. But if you look at it from a medical perspective, heart disease is heart disease is heart disease. And whether you are in England, or whether you are in Japan, or whether you are in Botswana, you pretty much use the same prescriptive and prevention strategies to do something about heart, and treatment strategies to do something about heart disease. So I wanted to frame this in this way so that, I really do believe in a world. My vision is a world without violence and a world without incarceration. Now, the problem with that is the history of the world is about violence. So a lot of people think I'm crazy, but
I agree. I agree.
the history of the world is about wars and violence. So I know what I'm up against. Probably the only other person, maybe only other couple of other people have thought like me. And you might say Martin Luther King, who is obviously, his birthday is right around the corner for us as we're talking here, who is a huge hero of mine, who really believed in nonviolence. And, and Gandhi, who also was a philosopher of nonviolence. So that's the bigger picture here. So as we talk to people, uh, that's what this thing is really about. It really is preventing violence anywhere. I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I can understand your pain wanting to teach kids and then see them end up incarcerated or dead. And I do enjoy to hear that you put then what you want to achieve as the name of the organization. So you're stating it in a positive and inspiring way.
Yes.
And you got me curious about the prescription, sir. I would love to know what's the prescription against violence?
So the prescription is really, and I'm gonna say I can say this very quickly. It is there's 4 steps in the prescription. The first step is to eliminate the thinking that goes with violence into violence. There's a certain way of people who are involved in violence think, and we actually call those the commandments of violence. The second step is to eliminate those things, is to decrease the risk factors in violence. There's certain risk factors. Just like there's risk factors in heart disease, there's risk factors in violence. The third, and this is the most difficult step, is if you get into this violent way of thinking, this way of thinking and way of acting, it produces a lot of anger, fear, and pain, a lot of emotional residue. So our young people get into these violent lifestyles thinking that it will actually work, when it really doesn't have a chance of working, are pretty emotionally messed up. So we have to help them with their anger, fear, and pain. And then the fourth step in the prescription is actually to prevent it from happening in the first place, right? So there are certain rules for living that we think if you put in place, have a good chance of mitigating the onset of violence in the first place. It decreases the risk that one will become a perpetrator or even a victim of violence. And let me just say, one of the things I discovered early with my young people, and actually looking around the world, is that actually people think that violence is a way to survive. Anytime you talk to somebody who is into this, they will tell you, I'm just trying to survive. Now, I can have individuals say that, or I can have whole countries tell me the same thing. We're just trying to survive. It is incorrect and a misnomer, and actually a foolhardy statement to say violence helps you to survive. No, violence just produces death. And so when I hear young people say, Dr. Marshall, I'm just trying to survive, I quickly point out, well, you're not surviving. You may think it's going to help you survive, but look at your situation. There's death all around you, and you're in jail. So what you thought was going to work, it's a very insidious thing, because most diseases, and I call violence a disease because it's acts like a disease, says what it intends to do. Heart disease says, I want to take your heart. AIDS says, I want to destroy your immune system. We see what's going on with COVID right now and Corona in the world. It says what it wants to do. Ebola says, I'm trying to destroy your body. Violence says, I want to help you. I want you to survive. So when you see people like, and I'll use a macro picture, when you see, Protestants and Catholics in Ireland who have been fighting for centuries for survival, nobody survives. Everybody dies. When you see what's going on in the Middle East that has been going on for centuries, all you have is body count. You don't have survival. They're in a constant state of fear of being, but they believe somehow the next violent thing will be the thing that helps them to survive. When you see what happened in Rwanda, maybe the worst cases, one of the worst cases of genocide ever, where they were fighting for survival, and you end up with 800,000 dead people in 2 months' time. It was a crazy number. So what I found out in doing this work is the world is not really into staying alive and free. The world is really into violence, principally because, and this is a hard statement, the world is into money. The world is into materialism. The world is into violence is a disease of power, domination, and control. That's really what it's about. If you want to ask me what the heart of it is, it's about power, domination, and control. And whatever one can do to get power, domination, and control, If violence is necessary to do that, they will do that. So I'm really, in many ways, going against the way of the world and the history of the world. So that's why people think I'm crazy.
Hmm. Maybe you can teach people that there is a way to be empowered without using violence. And that leads me into, we've spoken about the risks for violence, the commandments of violence, but what are the rules then for living a non-violent life? Maybe even speak in a non-violent way.
I like when you say that. One of the risk factors for violence is what we call destructive language. Destructive language are names that hurt, harm, demean, basically put people down. So there are certain names that we have found, and there are different names in different cultures. I remember going to South Africa and hearing the word kafir. That was a destructive term in that language. And when they had the genocide in Rwanda, they shot the people because they said they were cockroaches. That was a destructive term then, because nobody likes a cockroach. So what you generally find in any culture is a language of destruction, that, and it's usually names that you call people in order to dehumanize them. We did that. America has done that many times. Instead of calling them cultural names, America has used names like in Vietnam, we call them gooks. Therefore, that allowed us, we couldn't kill Vietnamese, we killed a gook because they were less than human. We did that in Japan when we went to war with Japan. They weren't Japanese, they were Japs. We've done that in Iraq when we call them towel heads and insurgents. You will always find names to dehumanize people. There are many names in the world: spicks, heinies, wetbacks. So there are all these destructive terms that we use to people because it's hard to kill somebody. You got to make them less than human. So with my kids, there are certain words. The N word, certainly in American history, is a huge destructive term. And we identify these words for young people, and we actually show them how it's used in the context of violence. And they aren't even aware of this stuff because they say this is how we talk. But we run back the frames and show them the words that were actually used. Right now, there's an insurrection going on in America. There are certain words that are being used to fit that. There are words that are being used that somebody just called the Speaker of the House a bitch, right? That they had to intentionally use these words to make her less than a human being, than a woman. So there is a language of violence. And it took a while for me to discover this, but as I began to work with young people, and so the fuel that they use in order to commit violence, language was a big part of it. So you're absolutely correct, sir. Language has always been a big part. There is, and I call it destructive language. Now the problem is, most people just say that's just how we talk, but it is destructive. And I like your perception about that. So certain words I don't use because it increases the risk that violence will occur. And if I don't use them, it decreases the risk that violence will occur. I hope I'm making a little bit of sense with this.
Yeah, that's making sense. And yeah, I see you inspiring people to speak kindly to each other. I wish we had an hour to talk because I'm really fascinated by this dialogue, but unfortunately we're starting to come up towards the end of this interview. So
yes, sir.
I'm curious. So if someone is listening to this and they want to either help you reduce violence or they want to reduce violence in their own lives, what are some simple things they can do to participate towards a peaceful Earth?
Well, first of all, fortunately, I have found people around the world who actually want to learn what I'm talking about. So there's a website, you see, stayaliveandfree.org, that they can contact me, and find more about this prescription, this Alive and Free prescription. A couple of simple rules that I can give them, rules for living is, our number one rule is there's nothing more valuable than an individual's life. That is our number one rule. And a corollary of that is that you can never kill an enemy. Most people believe you can kill an enemy, but all you do is create another enemy. It took me a while to get my young people to believe, while they thought they were, the gang members, while they thought they were solving a problem, they're actually creating another problem. So they firmly believe now that you cannot kill an enemy. If you want things to change, change begins with you, which is what I decided to do. I want to make this change. Another rule for living is respect comes from within. No one can disrespect you. if you respect yourself. A lot of people have a problem with being disrespected. Nations have a problem with being dishonored and disrespected. That's why they do this. And probably our biggest rule for young people who cannot handle peer pressure is: a friend will never lead you to danger, love will never lead you to danger, and family will never lead you to danger. And people have a difficult time identifying dangerous people, and they give passes to people because they have certain titles, presidents of countries. I'm Catholic. Priests, they give passes to because they have titles and are in position. But the key word is danger. And I have to help my young people identify what is actually dangerous to them. So those are some rules that we get our young people to live by. But when I go to any countries, I see the same thing everywhere. And I think these rules will help people anywhere. So that's a quick synopsis of the Alive and Free prescription. What's nice is that I have people around the world who are using this and helping young people and adults stay alive and free.
Beautiful. Dr. Joseph E. Marshall, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today and teaching our listeners how they can end violence in the world and in their own lives.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for having me once again.
Thank you. And for you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. That will show the algorithms that this conversation is important, so more people can hear and learn about how they can end violence, so we can transition into a peaceful world where we end our war history. Thank you so much for listening, and we see you in the next episode.